Chapter 30 of 6 Months in Mexico by Nellie Bly. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Scenes within Mexican homes. The city of Mexico makes many bright promises for the future. As a winter resort, as a summer resort, a city for men to accumulate fortunes, a paradise for students, for artists. A rich field for the hunter of the curious, the beautiful, and the rare, its bright future is not far distant. Already, its wonders are related to the enterprising people of the States, who are making tours through the land that held cities even at the time of the discovery of America. The Mexican Central Road, although completed only 5 years ago, offers every and even more comforts than old established Eastern roads. Many excursionists have had delightful visits here, and at present a number of Quakers have come to see for themselves what Mexico offers. One of the party was quizzing Mr. Theo Chesterfield, editor of the Two Republics, on the advisability of opening a mission for the poor and degraded of Mexico. Mr. Chesterfield is a first-class newspaperman formerly employed on the Chicago Tribune and has a practical and common-sense way of viewing things. His reply should be studied by all coming to Mexico to stay. He said, "Their religion has been the people's faith always, even before Americans lived. They are fanatics, and trying to change or convert them is wasting time. Let their faith alone, and go out and buy a farm on the tablelands and teach them how to farm and how to live. You will find them ready, willing, even anxious to learn. They will quickly imitate any way they know is better than theirs." The Quaker is still here, but so far as known, has neither started a mission nor bought a farm. Mexico is colder these last few days than the traditional oldest inhabitant ever remembered. But it is a pleasant change to the visitors who have left the snowbound country, even if a fire is an unheard of thing. People who read history form wrong ideas of how Mexican houses are built. They are square, plastered outside, and decorated. Many are 3 and 4 stories in height. The windows, which are always curtained, are finished with iron balconies. Massive doors on which are ponderous knockers of antique shape and size keep from view the inhabitants of the casa. A knock and the doors swing open, and a brown portero, dressed in the garb of his country, sombrero, serape, and all, admits you to the lower court, where the stables are kept and the servants live. Beautiful flowers, rare orchids, and tall waving palms are growing in rich profusion. Directly up through the center is a large open square. A stairway, decorated in the highest style of art, leads to the different departments. Fine statuary, singing birds, and fountains mingling with the flowers aid in making the scene superb. Just the opposite of the States, the higher up a room is, the better it is considered, and in hotels they charge accordingly: $1 first floor, $2 second, $3 third, and so on. A room is not healthy unless the sun shines into it, and they have no windows, just glass doors. All the hotels in Mexico are run on the European plan. They have restaurants attached where the waiters, as long as they smile, cannot do too much for their customers. Mexico has several good hotels of their kind, and most of them equal, if they are not superior, to the Yturbide, pronounced Yturbide. But Americans who run after royalty want to stop here so they can say they have stayed at the house which was the palace of the first emperor after Mexico was independent. Mexico looks the same all over. Every white street terminates at the foot of a snow-capped mountain, look which way you will. The streets are named very strangely, one straight street having half a dozen names. Each square has a different name, or designated as First San Francisco, the next block Second San Francisco. Policemen stand in the middle of the street all over the city, reminding one of so many posts. They wear white caps with numbers on, blue suits, nickel buttons. A mace now takes the place of the sword of former days. At night, they don an overcoat and hood, which makes them look just like the pictures of veiled knights, Their red lanterns are left in the place they occupied during the daytime, while they retire to some doorway where, it is said, they sleep as soundly as their brethren in the States. At intervals, they blow a whistle like those used by streetcar drivers, which are answered by those on the next posts. Thus, they know all is well. In small towns, they call out the time of night, ending up with tiempo sereno, all serene, from which the Mexican youth, with some mischievous Yankeeism, have nicknamed them sereno. It is very easy for those unaccompanied and not speaking Spanish to get around in Mexico. A baggage man meets the train out from the city who not only attends to his regular duties but gives any information regarding hotels that visitors may want. Numerous carriages of all kinds and descriptions stand around the depot. Each one is decorated with a flag by which the visitor may know the price without asking. White, red, and blue, 50 cents, 75 cents, and $1. The drivers often try to get the best of a tourist, especially if he speaks Spanish, and charge him $1 for a 75-cent carriage. The Mexicans do not differ much from the Yankee hackman. If any, it is in favor of the Mexican. They do not cheat so much because they are not sharp enough. Pulque shops, where they deal out the national drink, are quite plenty. These are the only buildings in the city that are decorated. They are generally corner buildings, and the two sides have finely painted pictures of ladies, ballet girls, men on gaily caparisoned horses, angels floating on clouds, etc. Numerous flags of black and red, or red and white, answer for a sign, but it is against the law to use the national flag. These saloons, or shops as they are called, stand wide open, with no screens to hide the dirty bar and drinkers from the eyes of pedestrians. They are patronized by men, women, and children, and are kept open all the time. ¿Sabe qué es pulque? Licor divino? Lo beben los ángeles en vez de vino. Know ye not pulque, that liquor divine? Angels in heaven prefer it to wine. Pulque is the fermented juice of the agave, or so-called century plant, which matures in from 5 to 15 years instead of 100 as generally believed. It grows wild here, but large plantations of it are cultivated. Just before the plant is ready to blossom, the natives gather the big fat leaves together around the bud, forming a sort of basin. The bud is then cut out and the juice from the stalk collects in the leaf-formed basin. One stalk will yield as high as 2 gallons a day for 6 months. The pulque is collected in jars that the gatherers carry suspended from their shoulders. It is sucked out of the basin through a hollow bamboo or reed and squirted from the mouth into the jar. A knowledge of this fact does not render the stuff any more palatable to foreigners. It is awfully nasty stuff, but they say that when you get acquainted with it, you like it real well. Mezcal is a sort of brandy distilled from pulque, and will paralyze almost as promptly as a stroke of lightning. Meteglin, honey and water, is made from the honey ant. They are placed in a piece of bolting cloth and the honey squeezed out of them. The streetcar system here is quite unique, but first a few statistics may prove interesting. They run on 90 miles of rails and carried last year 9 million passengers. The company owns 1,500 mules and horses, 139 first-class coaches, 65 second-class, 46 platform or freight cars, and 26 funeral cars. They pay an annual dividend of 6% on a capital of $5 million. The chairman of the board of directors, Señor Castillo, speaks Spanish and English. They are very particular about free passes, and so far this year have only issued 6. First-class cars are exactly like those in the States, and the second class look just like the Black Maria, except the wheels. Cars just like open freight or truck cars on railroads are used for hauling instead of wagons, and a dozen of these, loaded with merchandise, are drawn by one team. Movings and everything are hauled in this manner. The price charged is comparatively small. Cars do not run singly, but in groups of 4 and 5. Even on the first-class cars, men smoke as much as they wish. And if the women find it unbearable, They go out and stand on the platform. There are 2 conductors on each car. One sells the tickets, the other collects them. When the line was first opened, an enterprising stockholder bought up all the hearses in the city and had funeral cars made. The coffin is laid on one draped car, white for young and black for old, and the mourners and friends follow in streetcars hired for the purpose. A stylish funeral will have a dozen or more cars, the windows of which are hung with white crepe and the doors with black. The drivers and conductors appear in black suits and high silk hats. The horses are draped and have black and white plumes on their heads. The cost of funerals ranges from $20 to $1,500. A stylish one is a beautiful sight. The poor, by making application to the police, are given the funeral car and passage for 2 persons free. The low and poverty-stricken class also hire the coffins, and when they reach the cemetery, the corpse is taken out, wrapped in a serape, and consigned to a hired grave. That is, they buy the grave for 5 years, at the end of which time the bones are lifted and thrown in some corner, exposed to the gaze of the public, in order to make room for newcomers, and the tombstones, then useless, are laid in one heap by the gate. The people are no respecters of human bones. Americans always want to go back to the States to die. Streetcar drivers, of which there are 2 on each car, are compelled by law to blow a horn at every crossing to warn pedestrians of their coming. The horns are similar in tone and shape to those used by fish peddlers in the States. Drivers of every kind of vehicles use the long lash whip of plaited leather exclusively, and they ply them quite vigorously on their animals. They also urge them to faster speed by a sound similar to that which the villain on the stage makes as he creeps upon intended victims when asleep, with his finger on his lips. It sounds like a whiplash cutting through the air. The carts in use here are of the most ancient shape and style. 2 large wooden wheels support a big square box. 1 mule is hitched next to the wagon, and 3 abreast in front of that, and 1 still ahead. The harness baffles description. Drivers very seldom ride, but trot along beside their team with rope lines in their hands. They can trot at the speed of the mules with apparent comfort. Mexico does not breakfast. When people go into the restaurants and order a breakfast, the waiters look at them in wonder and inform them in the most polite terms in the world that they have but coffee and dry bread for breakfast. It is asserted that to eat breakfast will cause a heaviness and dullness for the entire day, but whether this is true or otherwise, it cannot be stated, for since our arrival in Mexico, we have been unable to find any other than as before mentioned, and black coffee at that. Every family takes their coffee in their bedrooms. It takes at least 2 hours to get through an ordinary dinner. A description of dinner in a private family will no doubt prove interesting to most readers, especially if they understand the difficulty of obtaining admission into a family. A Mexican will be all politeness, will do anything for you, will place his house at your service. But he and his family will move out. He will do anything but admit you to the secrecy of his house. So this experience is rare. Dinner was announced, and the gentlemen in the most courteous manner offered their arms, and we walked along the balcony to the dining room. The lace-hung doors were swung open, and there before us was the table with plate, knife, and fork, and a penny loaf of bread at each place. We sit down, take our napkins, and the waiters, always men, fill our glasses from the elegant water bottles that grace each end of the table. 1 dish, containing perhaps cold meat, salad, red pepper, radishes, and pickled beans, is served on plates, and the first ones taken away from us, although not used. After endeavoring to swallow some of this nauseating stuff, which the natives devour with relish, the servant removes the dish, our plates, knives, and forks, and another equally strange and equally detestable dish is brought on. Thus the feast continues, meanwhile breaking the penny loaf in bits and eating without a spread. Butter, which commands $1 a pound, is never seen from one year's end to another, and jelly is an unheard-of dish. The last dish, and one that is never omitted from dinner or supper, is frijoles, pronounced frijoles. Consists of beans, brown ones, with a sort of gravy over them. If a Bostonian were but to visit this country, his intellectual stomach, or appetite, would be sated for once. Sliced orange, covered with sugar and cinnamon, is dessert, after which comes chocolate or coffee, the former superb, the latter miserable. With the coffee, the ladies and gentlemen smoke their cigarettes. Children are really good here, their reverence for their parents being something beautiful. When entering the dining room, each one kisses its mother's hand, and when she asks them if they wish such and such to eat, they reply, "With your permission." Although all are smokers, they could not be persuaded to take a cigarette in their mother's presence. The pulque, which is also given around with the coffee, they refuse through respect to their mother, but they drink when she is not by, and of course she is aware of the fact, and has no desire to prohibit them from it. It is just their form of respect to refrain in her presence. A Mexican could not be compelled to eat of two different dishes from one plate. Even the smallest child is proof against persuasion on this point. The frijoles, or beans, are served on a tortilla, a sort of corn cake baked in the shape of a buckwheat cake. Another tortilla is folded together and answers for a spoon. After finishing the beans, it is not considered proper or polite unless you eat your spoon and plate. Every family has at least half a dozen servants. They are considered excellent when they receive $5 a month and board themselves. Sometimes they are paid $3 a month and allowed 6 cents a day to furnish what they want to eat. This sum is called the retainer. Women do the cooking, and the men wait on the tables, make the beds, and nurse the babies. Contrary to the usual report, they are very, very cleanly. Every room in the house is swept daily. Balconies and uncarpeted rooms scrubbed as often. Beds which are always single iron cots, like those used in hospitals, have board or iron bottoms, and the hardest of hard pillows. Brooms are an unseen article. Notwithstanding, the country furnishes the most beautiful broom corn in the world. It is brought in bunches and tied to a short stick and used in that manner, forcing the sweeper to bend nearly double. Scrub brushes are but a bunch of coarse straw tied around the top with a string, but they make the floors perfectly white. There is a fortune here awaiting some lively fellow who will bring machinery and make brooms and brushes for the natives. The straw costs comparatively nothing and is of the very best quality. Lotteries swarm here and are a curse to the poor. Men, women, and children sell the tickets along the streets, and the poor have such a mania for buying that they will pawn their clothing in order to obtain a ticket. There are no newsboys in this country. Occasionally, a boy is seen with a package of papers, but he does not call out like they do in the States. Women generally sell papers, which they fold and hold out toward passers-by, never saying a word. The people appear just the opposite of lazy. They move along the streets with a trot, equal in speed to the burro. They never turn their heads to gaze at a stranger, but go along intent on their own affairs as if they realize the value of time and shortness of life. Ladies in the States should import their servants from Mexico. Their hire is a very little sum. They furnish their own food. They are the most polite, most obedient people alive, and are faithful. Their only fault, and a very common one with servants, is that they are slow, but not extremely so. To children they are most devoted. As nurses they are unexcelled. Their love for children amounts to a passion, a mania. As a common thing here, a girl of 13 is not happy unless she has a baby. But with all that, they are most generous with them. Much amusement was caused the other day by an American asking a pretty little black-eyed girl if the bouncing babe tied to her back was hers. "Si, senor, and yours too," she replied politely. The men share the troubles of nursing with the women, and the babies, tied on their mother's or father's back, seem as content as if they were rocked in downy cradles. Babies, as soon as born, are clad in pantaloons and loose waist, irrespective of sex. There are no 3-yard skirts on them. Boys retain this garb, but girls, when able to walk, are wrapped twice around the body with a straight cloth which serves for skirts. If you ask a native in regard to the sex of a baby, he will not say it is a boy or it is a girl, but el hombre, a man, or la mujer, the woman. All efforts fail to make them say hijo, son, or hija, daughter. End of Chapter 30. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Chapter 31 of 6 Months in Mexico by Nellie Bly. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. The Romance of the Mexican Pulque. The maguey plant is put to as many uses by the Mexicans as the cocoa palm is by the South Sea Islanders. All around Mexico, even on the barren plains where nothing else can exist, it grows in abundance. Its leaves are 10 and more feet in length, a foot in breadth, and about 8 inches thick. Of course, there are smaller and larger growths according to their age. After collecting strength for about 7 years, it sprouts from the center a giant flower stalk, 20 or 30 feet high, on which often cluster 3,000 flowers of a greenish-yellow color. These wonderful plants in bloom along the plains form one of the most magnificent sights in Mexico. At the very least, 40 have been seen at one place, each vying with the other to put forth the most beauty. A prince named Papautzin, of the noble blood of the Toltec, discovered some fluid in a plant whose flowering spike had been accidentally broken off. After saving it for some time, he had the curiosity to taste it, and that taste was not only delicious to him, but was destined to moisten the throat and muddle the brain of the Mexicans for generations and generations, and to cause the curious and ever-inquiring tourist to do like the whale did at the taste of Jonah. This noble prince was not like an Eastern Yankee. He did not keep his mouth shut until he obtained a patent. If he had, telephones and gas wells would be nowhere in comparison as a money-making scheme. He kindly sent some to his sovereign by his beautiful daughter Xochitl, the flower of Tolan. The noble king drank and looked and drank. The more he drank, the more he liked the stuff. The more he looked, the more he liked the girl. So he kept her, a willing prisoner, and their son was placed upon the throne. Generations after generations rolled by lovely Xochitl. The king, their son, and the illustrious discoverer had solved the wonderful problem. The maguey plant was cultivated by thousands, and oceans of its fluid had gone down the throats of the natives. This was the origin of the Mexican national drink pulque. No estimate can be formed of the amount used, but it is enormous. It is simply water for the natives, and a pulque shop graces almost invariably every corner in the cities. As stated in a former chapter, these shops are the finest decorated places in Mexico. Superb paintings of all scenes grace the interior and exterior. Flags float gracefully over the doors, and customers are always plenty. Men, women, and children can be seen constantly drinking from clay pitchers of a generous size, for the full of which they pay but 2 cents. No respectable Mexican would enter a pulque shop, but they all drink it at every meal. The maguey is planted at the interval of 3 yards apart, and in such a manner that every way you look across an estate, the plants run in a straight line. They thrive in almost any soil, and after planting need no more attention until the time of flowering, which is anywhere from 6 to 10 years. The Indians know by infallible signs just when the flowering stem will appear, and at that time they cut out the whole heart, leaving only a thick outside, which forms a natural basin. Into this the sap continually oozes, and it is removed twice, sometimes thrice a day, by a peon, who sucks it into his mouth and then ejects it into the jar he carries on his back. As soon as the plant exhausts all this sap, which was originally intended to give strength and life to the flowering stem, it dies. and is replaced by innumerable suckers from the old root. Great care must be exercised in cutting the plant. If the least too soon or too late, it is the death of it. When first extracted, the sap is extremely sweet, from which it derives its name, aguamiel, honey water. Some of this is fermented for 15 and 25 days, when it is called madre pulque, the mother of pulque. This is distributed in very small quantities among different pigskins. Then the fresh is poured on it, and in 24 hours it is ready for sale. Plants ready to cut are valued at about $5, but an established maguey ground will produce a revenue of $10,000 to $15,000 per annum. Pulque is brought to town in pig and goat skins. It has a peculiar sour milkish taste and smells exactly like hop yeast. From the mild pulque is distilled a rum called mezcal. It is of a lovely brown golden color and very pleasant to the taste. One can drink it all night, be as drunk as a lord, and have no big head in the morning. If it was once introduced into the States, nothing else would be used, for no difference how much is drank, the head is as clear and bright as the teetotalers in the morning. Nor is this the only use of the plant. Poor people roof their huts with the leaves, placing one on the other like shingles. The hollowed leaf serves as a trough for conducting the water. The sharp thorns are stripped off, leaving the fibers attached, and the natives use them as a needle, already threaded. Paper is made from the pulp of the leaves, and twine and thread from their fibers. The twine is woven into rugs, mats, sacks, ropes, harness, even to the bits, and dainty little purses which tourists buy up like precious articles. The wonderful productive powers of this plant do not end here. The expensive cochineal bug, used for coloring purposes and for paint, counts this maguey its foster mother. On its wide leaves does it live externally and internally until the gatherer comes and plucks it off, probably to color some dainty maid's gown in the far distant land or tint some sky of an artist's dream. Yet maguey thinks it has not done enough for mortals, and it accomplishes one more thing for which the Mexicans would treasure its memory, but Americans would gladly excuse it. Clinging to the shadiest side, in a childlike confidence, is a long green worm, similar to the unkillable cabbage worm of the States. Peons, in a gentle manner, so as not to crush or hurt, pluck these tender young things, and putting them in a vessel, bring the fruits of their work to town. Nothing can be compared to the way and haste in which people buy them. Fried in butter, a little brown milk gravy around, and they set on the table as the greatest delicacy of all Mexican dishes. It is needless to add that the natives eat them with wonderful relish, and are quick to say, "We know what these dainty things are, but you folks eat oysters." End of chapter 31. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Chapter 32 of 6 Months in Mexico by Nellie Bly. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Mexican Manners. Among the most interesting things in Mexico are the customs, followed by the people, which are quaint and, in many cases, pretty and pleasing. Mexican politeness, while not always sincere, is vastly more agreeable than the courtesy current among Americans. Their pleasing manners seem to be inborn, yet the Mexican of Spanish descent cannot excel the Indian in courtesy, who, though ignorant, unable to read or write, could teach politeness to a Chesterfield. The moment they are addressed, their hat is in hand. If they wish to pass, they first beg your permission. Even a child, when learning to talk, is the perfection of courtesy. If you ask one its name, it will tell you, and immediately add, "I am your servant," or "your servant to command." This grows with them, and when past childhood, they are as near perfection in this line as it is possible to be. When woman meets woman, then doesn't come the tug of war, but instead the hug and kissing. The kissing is never on the lips, but while one kisses a friend on the right cheek, she is being kissed on the left, and then they change off and kiss the other side. Both sides must be kissed. This is repeated according to the familiarity existing between them, but never on the lips, although with an introduction, the lips are touched. The hug. Well, it is given in the same place as it is in other countries, and in a right tight and wholly earnest manner. From the first moment, they are expected to address each other only by their Christian names, the family name never being used. The parlor furniture is arranged the same way all over Mexico. The sofa is placed against the wall, and the chairs form a circle around it. The visitor is given the sofa, which is the seat of honor, and the family sit in the circle, the eldest nearest the sofa. The visitor expects to be asked to play the piano, which she does in fine style, and then the hostess must play after her or commit a breach of courtesy, which social crime she also commits if she neglects to ask the guest to play. Visitors always stay half a day, and before leaving she is treated to a dish of fine dulce, a sweet dessert, cigarettes and wine. Then mantillas are put on. Blessings, good wishes, kisses, and embraces are exchanged. Each says, "My house is yours, I am your servant," and depart. All the rules of decorum have been obeyed. When men are introduced, they clasp hands, not the way Americans do, but with thumbs interlocked, and embrace with the left arm. Then the left hands are clasped, and they embrace with the right arm, patting the back in a hearty manner. The more intimate they become, the closer the embrace, and it is not unusual to see men kiss. These embraces are not saved for private or home use, but are as frequent on the streets as hat-tipping is here. The hand-clasping is both agreeable and hearty. They clasp hands every time they part, if it be only for an hour's duration, and again when they meet. And when careless Americans forget the rule, they vote them very rude and ill-bred. Undoubtedly, as a nation, we are. On the street, a woman is not permitted to recognize a man first. She must wait until he lifts his shining silk hat. Then she raises her hand until on a level with her face, turns the palm inward with the fingers pointing toward the face, then holds the first and fourth fingers still, and moves the two center ones in a quick motion. The action is very pretty, and the picture of grace when done by a Mexican señora, but is inclined to deceive the green American and lead him to believe it is a gesture calling him to her side. When two women walk along together, the youngest is always given the inside of the pavement, or if the younger happens to be married, she gets the outside. They are quite strict about this. Also, if a gentleman is with a mother and daughters, he must walk with the mother, and the girls must walk before them. A woman who professes Christianity will not wear a hat or bonnet to church, but gracefully covers her head with a lace mantilla. No difference how nicely she is clad. She is not considered dressed in good taste unless powdered and painted to the height reached only by chorus girls. 4 years ago, the Americans tell me, the Mexican women promenaded the streets and parks and took drives in ball dresses, low neck, sleeveless, and with enormous trains. This has almost been stopped, although the finest of dresses, vivid in color and only suitable for house or reception wear, are yet worn on Sundays. Everybody wears jewelry, not with good taste, but piled on recklessly. I've seen men with rings on every finger, always excepting the thumb, and the cologne used is something wonderful. You can smell it while they are a square off, and it is discernible when they are out of sight. A man is not considered fashionable unless he parts his hair in the middle, from his forehead to the nape of his neck, and dress it à la pompadour. The handkerchief is always carried folded in a square, and is used alternately to wipe his dainty little low-cut boots and the face. Afterward, it is refolded and replaced in the pocket. Visitors are always expected to call first, to see their friends when in town, as it would be a great breach of decorum for a family to call on a visitor before he or she came to their house. If 2 or more people meet in a room and are not acquainted, they must speak, but not shake hands. They can converse until someone comes, when they will accept an introduction and embrace, as if they had just that instant met. When one occupies a bench in the park with a stranger, neither must depart without bidding the other farewell, and very often while murmuring adieus they clasp hands and lift hats. Mexicans in talking employ a number of signs, which mean as much to them and are as plainly understood as English words would be to us. They speak their sign language gracefully. Indeed, they are a very graceful people, and yet they never study it or give it a thought. When they want a waiter in a restaurant or a man on the streets, they never call or whistle as we do, but simply clasp the hands several times, and the wanted party comes. The system is very convenient and far more pleasing than the American plan. When wishing to beckon anyone, they throw the hand from them in the same manner as Americans do if they want anyone to move on. To go away, they hold the fingers together and move them toward the body. They never say that a man is drunk. It sounds vulgar, and as they will get that way, they merely place the index finger on the temple and incline the head slightly toward the person meant. They could never be abrupt enough to say anyone was crazy or had no brains, so they touch the forehead between the eyebrows with the first finger. To speak of money, they form a circle of the thumb and forefinger. To ask you to take a drink or tell the servants to bring one, the thumb is turned toward the mouth. To ask you to wait a little while, the first finger is held within 1/4 of an inch of the thumb. To hold the palm upward and slowly move the hand backward and forward says as plain as English, "I am going to whip my wife," or "I whip my wife." If they want you to play a game at cards, they close both fists and hold them tightly together. Touching the thumb rapidly with the forefingers closed means you have much or many of anything, like many friends. Making a scissors sign with the fist and second finger means you are cutting someone in the back. Whittling one forefinger with the other means you got left. When courting on the balcony and the girl smooths her lip and chin, you are warned to get out. The old man is coming. In company, when one is so unfortunate as to sneeze, they are greatly insulted and the company is badly wanting in good manners, unless, just as the sneeze is finished, everyone ejaculates, "Jesu, Jesucristo." End of Chapter 32. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Chapter 33 of 6 Months in Mexico by Nellie Bly. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Noche Triste tree. I presume everybody who knows anything about history remembers reading how Cortés, when he thought he was going to lose the fight for Mexico on July 10, 1520, retired under a tree and wept. Since that time, the tree has been known to the inhabitants as the Noche Triste, the sad night. It stands before an ancient chapel in a public square of the little village of Popotla. I don't know why, for I could never think of Cortés except as a thieving murderer, but the Noche Triste receives a great deal of attention from the natives and all the tourists. On the 2nd of May, 1872, the tree was found to be on fire. A citizen of Popotla, Señor José María Enriquez, who venerated the old relic, followed by hundreds of people, rushed to its rescue. They did what they could with buckets, and at last 2 hand pumps were brought from an adjoining college. It is said that fully 5,000 people visited the burning tree that day. After burning for 24 hours, the flames were conquered. Since then, Noche Triste has been enclosed by a high iron fence. Despite the fire, it is yet a grand old tree. Everybody visits the Cathedral of Mexico. It is a grand old building of enormous size and covered with carved figures facing the Zócalo. It is surrounded by well-kept gardens in which are many beautiful statues and ancient Aztec figures. In the cathedral is the tomb of the Emperor Yturbide and superb paintings, some by Murillo. The history of the cathedral is interesting. It was the Church of Santa María de la Asunción until January 31, 1545, when it was declared the Metropolitan Cathedral of Mexico. Philip II issued a royal decree that the cathedral should correspond to the magnificence of the city, and in 1573 the work was begun. It occupies the very ground on which stood the principal temple of the Aztecs. The site was bought from the Franciscan monks for $40. A period of 42 years was consumed in laying the foundations, raising the exterior walls, building the transverse walls of the chapels, working the columns to the height of the capitals, and making some progress upon the domes. The architecture for this temple pertains to the Doric order. The structure is 133 Spanish yards in length and 74 in width. It has 174 windows and is divided into 5 naves, the principal one of which measures 53 feet in width from column to column. The aisles correspond in number to the 33 chapels formed by 20 pillars, 10 on each side. From base to capital, the pillars measure 54 feet in height and 14 in circumference. The roof is composed of 51 domes or vaults resting upon 74 arches. The church is pyramidal in form, its height diminishing in regular proportion from the main nave to the chapels. There are 3 entrance doors on the southern front, 2 on the northern, and 2 on each of the sides. After 95 years of continual work, the final solemn dedication was celebrated December 22, 1677. The cost of the cathedral, exclusive of the external decoration, at least of the Sagrario, amounted to $1,752,000, so that it may well be said that $2.5 million were invested in the 2 churches, whose erection extended over more than a century. During my 6 months in Mexico, I received hundreds of letters from men asking my advice about their coming to Mexico for business purposes. I never give advice, but if I were a man and had a certain amount of patience, I should go to Mexico. If one can get used to the people and their mañana movements, the place is perfect. The land in most localities is the easiest imaginable to cultivate. A farmer can have as many harvests a year as he has space. He can sow in one place and harvest in another, so perfect is the climate. The only complaint is of a lack of water, but as it is always to be found 6 feet under the surface of the earth, one can have it. Anything will grow if put in the ground. I visited one place that had been barren 3 years previous, and it was the most beautiful garden spot in Mexico. The trees were equal to any 9-year-old trees in the States. There is no weather to interfere with their growth. A great number of Englishmen, Germans, and French have settled in Mexico, and by their thrift are accumulating fortunes rapidly. Barring a little dislike, the Americans have the same chances. Mexico produces better broom corn than the United States, and for the smallest possible cost and trouble. Very few farmers interest themselves in broom corn, so there is a place for Americans to step in and make money. Silk culture could also be made one of Mexico's principal industries. It can be carried on with little or no capital. Anyone who possesses a few mulberry trees can, without abandoning his regular work, care for silkworms. An ounce of silkworm eggs costs $5 and will produce not less than 50 kilograms of cocoons that are worth $1 per kilogram. It is only necessary to buy eggs the first time, for the worms keep producing them. The mulberry tree thrives in all parts of Mexico, and the silkworm needs no protection of any kind from the climate. Nor are they subjected to diseases here which elsewhere cause great loss. It costs less to raise silkworms in Mexico than in Europe, and a far better quality are produced. Mulberry shoots will produce sufficient foliage to maintain silkworms within 3 years after planting. The eggs, while containing the embryo silkworm, have a dull lavender color, but after discharging the worm they resembled little sugar pills. The worms were about 1/16 of an inch long, but the first week of molting shows them to be ½ an inch long, and the second week 1 inch. For the third molting, they are placed on perforated paper, through the holes of which the worms crawl. This relieves the attendant of considerable labor in transferring them. The 4th week, the head is white, and the worm has attained its normal growth. There is nothing now for the worm to do but leaf around and lunch on mulberry leaves until the 8th or 9th day after shedding its skin the 4th time, when he or she, as the case may be, proceeds to form its cocoon. It is then of a golden transparent color. It takes about 5 days for the industrious worm to finish its cocoon. Then, to destroy the moth inside, it is subjected to heat, and the cocoon is then ready for spinning. When ready for use, the cocoons are soaked in a tub of water until all the glutinous substance is removed. With a small whisk broom, the cocoon is brushed until ends, which are as fine as a cobweb, come loose. They will then reel off without breaking. One cocoon will give 400 yards of raw silk. Indian rubber trees are also easily cultivated in Mexico, and the demand for them is large. It's easy to make a comfortable income in Mexico if one goes about it rightly. End of Chapter 33. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Chapter 34 of 6 Months in Mexico by Nellie Bly. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Little Notes of Interest. Superstition is the ruin of Mexico. While we were there, some children found a shell containing an image of the Virgin. The matter was deemed miraculous, and they directly decided to build a chapel on the spot where the shell was found. In the state of Morelos exists a stone that they say was used before the conquest to call the people to labor or to war. The stone appears to be hewn. In the center of the upper part is a hole which runs into the heart of the stone, forming a spiral. On fitting to this a mouthpiece and blowing, the sound of a horn is produced, somewhat melancholy in tone, but so loud that it can be heard a great distance. The ranchmen of that locality employ it as a means of calling their flocks, and the animals quickly obey the summons. It is known as the calling stone. There is a tradition about this stone. They say that no difference where it is taken, that by some invisible means, it always goes back to the spot it has occupied for the past century. They say that once it was even chained in a cellar, but in the morning it was missing, and when they searched for it, it was found in its old position. Mexico abounds with the most beautiful and wonderful flowers. Many are unknown even to horticulturists. One of the novel flowers I heard of was one which grew on the San Jose Hacienda, some 22 leagues from the city of Tehuantepec. In the morning it is white, at noon it is red, and at night it is blue. At noon it has a beautiful perfume, but at no other time. It grows on a tree. There are very few fires in Mexico, and it is a blessing to the citizens. They have one fire company, but no alarms. When there is a fire, the policeman nearest gives the customary alarm, 3 shots in the air from his revolver. The next policeman does the same, and on up until they come to the policeman near the fireman's office. The fires are always out or the place reduced to ashes before those noble laddies put in an appearance. On every corner is hung a sign, giving a list of all the business places on that block. The turkeys in Mexico are the most obliging things I ever saw. They are brought into town in droves, and they never scatter but walk quietly along, obeying the voice of their driver. If he wants a drink, he makes them lie down, and they stay until he returns. Mail is delivered every day in the week, Sunday not excepted. Every letterbox contains a slip which the carrier fixes, which tells when the next collection will be made. Printed slips are published daily and hung in the corridors of the post office of unclaimed letters and papers, and of those that have not gone out for lack of postage. Houses are never labeled to let when they are empty. A piece of white paper is tied to the iron balcony, and everybody knows what it means. No taxes are paid on empty houses or uncultivated land. People never rent houses by the year, but by the day or week. They can move at any time they wish. This makes landlords civil. Grass is cut in the park with a small piece of zinc, which is sharpened on a stone, and it is raked with a twig broom. No houses have bathrooms, but the city is well supplied with public swimming baths. One can have a room in a private bath for 25 cents. Everybody of any note takes a bath every morning. It is quite a pretty and yet strange sight to see the beautiful young girls coming leisurely up the prominent thoroughfares early in the morning, with their exquisite hair hanging in tangled masses often to their feet. They are always attended by a maid. Mexican ladies have a contempt for people who do not have servants. They never carry anything on the streets, but always have a mozo, even to carry an umbrella. Because Veracruz has such a large death rate from yellow fever, the Mexicans have named it La Ciudad de los Muertos, the City of the Dead. In Yucatan, the Maya language is still used. It is very musical and is written all in capitals. It is considered polite and quite a compliment for a man to stare at a lady on the streets. I might add that the men, by this rule, are remarkably polite. Families employ street musicians by the month to visit them for a certain time daily. The hand organs there are most musical instruments. Shoes are never marked with a number, but are fitted until they please the buyer. The shoes worn on the streets are what would be the pride of an actress. They are very cheap. The easiest English word for the Mexican to learn is all right. Even the Indians catch it quickly. They all like to speak English. Butter is seldom seen in Mexico. The only way they have of getting it is by its forming from the rocking on the burro's back while being brought to town. It is skimmed off the milk by the hand and is sold at a big price. It is never salted. The butter is always wrapped in corn husks, looking exactly like an ear of corn until it is opened. They also make cottage cheese, and tying it up in green reeds, sell it. Salt is very expensive. It costs a single man about $150 a month for his room, rent, and board. He must also retain the chambermaid and the patero, doorkeeper, with certain amounts. Young men never carry night keys in Mexico because they weigh about a pound. According to law, every door must be locked at 10 o'clock, and all those entering afterward must pay the patero for unlocking and unbarring the heavy portals. The poor, when dead, are carried to the graveyard on the heads of cargadores. If the coffin is only tied shut with a rope, it is borrowed for the occasion. The body is taken out at the cemetery and consigned coffinless to Mother Earth. The Mexicans began to call the Americans gringos during the war. They say the way the title originated was this. At that time, an old ballad, Green Grows the Rushes, O, was very popular, and all the American soldiers were singing it. The Mexicans could only catch green grows, and so they have ever since called the Americans gringos. Newspapers are published every day in the week except Monday. Sunday is always a feast day, and as no one will work then, the paper cannot be gotten out for Monday. Mexicans never suffer from catarrh. They say it is because they will not wash the face while suffering from a cold. They say a green leaf pasted on the temple cures headaches. The women in Mexico are gaining more freedom gradually. They have them now as telegraph and telephone operators. Some Mexican bachelors use the telephone for an alarm clock. That is, they have the girls wake them by means of the telephone placed in their room. No bills are legal unless they are stamped. Every man has a peculiar mark which he scratches beneath his name. It is a sort of a trademark and makes his name legal. The Indian women have some means of coloring cotton so that it will never fade. There are public letter writers on the plazas where one can have the correspondence attended to for a small sum. Letter writing is an expensive thing in Mexico. To all points not exceeding 16 leagues, they pay 10 cents for a quarter of an ounce, or 50 cents an ounce. Postal cards are 2 cents. To send a letter to the United States only costs 5 cents. Every state in Mexico has its own stamps. Some haciendas are enormously large in Mexico. One man owns a farm through which the railroad runs for 30 miles. It is said to comprise 10,000 square miles. The public schools in Mexico are similar to those in the States 50 years ago. The schools are never mixed. The boys attend one place and the girls another. The advanced teachers are elected and are given a house to hold the school in, and $100 a month for conducting it. For the others, they get a house somewhere and from $30 to $60. 10 years ago, girls were not taught spelling or writing in public schools. They are now taught all the common branches and English, which has replaced French. Sketching, music, fancy work, and plain sewing. The hours are from 8 to 12:30 and from 2 to 6. They are thoroughly taught the geography of their own country, but they absolutely learn nothing of other lands. End of Chapter 34. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Chapter 35 of 6 Months in Mexico by Nellie Bly. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. A few recipes for Mexican dishes. Probably someone would like to make a few of the dishes most common to the Mexican table. Of course, you will think them horrible at first, but once you acquire the taste, American food is insipid in comparison. Recipe for tortillas. Soften corn in alkaline water, then grind it fine. Pat into round cakes and bake on a thin iron pan. Eat while hot. They are made very good by wrapping them around meat or a seasoned pepper. Albóndigas, meatballs. Take equal parts of fresh pork and beef, say 1 pound. Cut as for sausage. Put in salt, pepper, a small piece of soaked bread, and 1 egg, well beaten. Make into small balls, putting in a piece of hard-boiled egg, an almond, and a raisin. In a dish of hot lard, put 5 or 6 crushed tomatoes, a little chopped onion, salt, pepper, and broth. Let boil a few moments, and then put in the balls. When the meat is cooked, it is ready for the table. Rice with chicken or fresh pork. Wash and dry the rice. Have a dish of hot lard. Put in the rice. Fry a few moments. Then add chopped tomatoes, onions, salt, pepper, 2 or 3 thinly sliced potatoes, and a few peas. Cook a few moments, then pour into it the chicken or pork and some of the broth in which they have been boiled. Stuffed red peppers. Open the pepper, take out the seeds, and wash and dry carefully. Boil and then chop fine as much fresh pork as you will need to stuff your peppers. In a dish of hot lard, put the meat with plenty of fine-cut tomatoes and onions, salt, and pepper. Boil a few moments, then add a little sugar, cloves, cinnamon, almonds, and raisins cut in half. Cook a little, then fill the peppers. If you have 8 peppers, beat 3 eggs, whites and yolks separately. When well beaten, put together, and in this roll the peppers, having first sprinkled over them a little flour. Have a dish of hot lard to which has been added a little ground tomato, cinnamon, salt, pepper, and a little water. Boil a few moments, then put in the peppers, having first fried them in hot lard. Boil a few moments, and they are ready for use. The peppers can be filled with cheese if preferred instead of meat. Green peppers with eggs and cheese. Roast the peppers over the coals. Take off the thin skin. Take out the seeds. Wash and cut into thin strips. In a dish of hot lard, put some tomatoes and onions cut fine, and about 2 cups of water. When boiling, break in as many eggs as desired. When cooked, put in the peppers and slices of cheese. Rightly prepared, it is delicious. Coconut dulce. Grate fine 2 coconuts. Put in a dish 3 pounds of sugar, let boil, take off the scum, then add the coconut, stirring all the time. After, a little bowl of cream, then later 18 eggs, well beaten. Let cook, stirring constantly until when you pass the spoon through the middle of the mixture, you can see the bottom of the dish. Then take off. Put in platters. Peel and cut almonds in half. Put them in as thickly as you please. Pass over it a hot iron until nicely smoothed. Pineapple and sweet potato dulce. Grate pineapple and boil sweet potatoes half and half. For 1 pineapple, 2 pounds of sugar. Let boil and skim. Put in and boil, stirring all the time until you can see the bottom of the pan as the spoon passes through the center. Rice and almonds. 1 ounce of grated almonds, 1 ounce of rice washed and ground. Put in enough milk so it will pass through a cloth. Put this in a quart of milk with 3 yolks of eggs and sugar to taste. Boil until well done. Flavor to taste. End of Chapter 35. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Chapter 36 of 6 Months in Mexico by Nellie Bly. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Some Mexican legends. There is hardly a spot in Mexico that has not some romantic history connected with it, and the tales are always so beautiful and full of thrilling romance. I would like to live in Mexico sometime and devote all my attention to gathering these interesting stories. I have given samples of them in the history of Don Juan Manuel. The Street of the Jewel is also connected with a story full of love and its companion, despair. Here dwell Gasper Villarreal and his wife Violante Armejo. Gasper was a man of moderate means, but he had enough to preserve his wife from labor. She was of wondrous beauty, but quite strange. She only cared to hide herself in her convent-like home. She loved her husband, and he was as jealous as a Mexican can be. One day a young noble, Diego de Fajardo, rode by the door, and being thirsty, he asked the mozo for a drink. Violante sat in the corridor, looking upon the garden, and dreaming doubtless of her absent lord. True to the instincts of her race, she ordered the mozo to take the stranger a glass of wine. The servant did her bidding, explaining to the young cavalier the reason of the change in his refreshments. Diego de Fajardo felt that it would be churlish to ride away without acknowledging the gracious hospitality. He tossed his bridle to the man and passed into the garden. Violante still sat in her hammock, garbed in spotless white, the perfection of beauty, grace, and innocence. The young caballero had not uttered his thanks until he had vowed to win Gasper Villarreal's lovely wife. Day after day he watched the casa, waiting for an opportunity to find the wife alone. At last, fate favored him. It was near nightfall when he saw the husband come forth and, taking saddle, ride toward the city. In a moment, eager and confident, he fell on his knees before Violante and confessed his love. She did not fall into his arms, but she spurned him, and with such anger that he saw his conduct in its true light. And, repentant, he arose from his knees and left her. Violante started to her chamber to seek her rosary and to cool her throbbing brow with the touch of holy water, when her foot struck a sparkling object. It was a bracelet with her name Violante in diamonds, close beside the coronet and arms of de Fajardo. As she stood, her husband entered. Having to return for something, he had been struck with horror to see a man rush from his gateway. There stood his wife with the jewel in her hand, the evidence of her guilt. Without a word, he sunk his dagger in her breast. As she sunk lifeless to the floor, he snatched the gleaming bracelet from her stiffening fingers and left the house. Diego de Fajardo was wakened in the morning by his mozo. Something had happened, and he was wanted to go out in the street to see if he could understand it. Tremblingly, he obeyed. On the pavement, Gasper Villarreal lay rigid, his garments soaked with his life's blood. Near the bronze knocker of the massive door was a splendid diamond bracelet suspended on a blood-stained dagger. In 1550, the lake of Texcoco overflowed and almost submerged the city of Mexico. Among the objects found drifting upon the water was a large canvas on which appeared a beautiful representation of the Virgin. None could determine where it came from, so a chapel was built for it. It is called Our Lady of the Angels. For centuries it has received the veneration of man. Another inundation occurred in 1607, and all the chapel, except the side holding the Virgin's picture, was washed away. Despite all the storms, the picture was said to be as bright as if just from the painter's brush. A new chapel was built around this marvelous painting, which stood until 1627, when another flood took it all away, excepting the one wall holding the Virgin's likeness. There, neglected and unprotected, it stood as the storms had left it until 1745, when a succession of public calamities drove the people to implore the succor of the Virgin. A building was again erected around the uninjured painting. Thus, until the present day, the people in need seek the painting to pour forth their prayers at its feet. El Desierto and its old Carmelite convent occupy the most charming spot in Mexico. It is only 15 miles from the capital, and the way is along the most romantic and picturesque road a southern clime can produce. The forest that surrounds El Desierto is composed of the largest trees in the valley, hardly excepting those of Chapultepec. The convent was a group of massive buildings, domes, and turrets, now crumbling into decay. In 1625, the monks retreated to this wilderness to mortify the flesh, and strange stories of their serio-jovial life, their sparkling wines, and romance of their hermit-like existence come creeping down through centuries. The jolly monks are no more, and the winds sigh through the mighty forest that has ridden romance, love, and tragedy from the world. The conqueror Cortés, not satisfied with robbing the grand old Aztec king Montezuma of his land and life, also robbed him of his daughter. The poor woman, after he deserted her, died in a convent, leaving a daughter, the child of Cortés. This daughter of Cortés and granddaughter of Montezuma was married very young to a Spanish captain Quinteros. There are now in Puebla descendants of that illegal love. End of chapter 36. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Chapter 37 of 6 Months in Mexico by Nellie Bly. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. Princess Josefa de Yturbide. I cannot close this little book without speaking of one of the most remarkable and brilliant women in Mexico, the only daughter of the emperor. After the execution of the emperor, the family came to the States and settled in Philadelphia. Josefa was sent to Georgetown to receive an English education, and she yet retains a love for America and its people. When Maximilian entered Mexico, he restored the titles to the Yturbide family and invited the cultured princess to become a member of his imperial household. Subsequently, Emperor Maximilian adopted Agustin Yturbide, grandson of the late emperor, and appointed the Princess Josefa guardian of the Prince Imperial. Maximilian soon recognized the wonderful executive abilities of the princess, and he consulted her on momentous occasions. Had he taken her advice, I doubt not that Mexico would have had an empire today. After the fall of Maximilian, Mrs. Yturbide, formerly Alice Green of Washington, D.C., claimed and recovered her son, who had been temporarily heir presumptive to the throne of Mexico. The Princess Josefa went to the court of Austria. 9 years ago, she returned to Mexico, where she lives in seclusion. She is one of the loveliest women in every respect I ever met. Her rooms at the Hotel Humboldt are plain, but contain many little mementos of former glory. The pictures and busts of the unfortunate emperor and empress occupy prominent positions. Carlotta was only 23 years old when she came to Mexico, said the princess. She was a beautiful girl, with a creamy complexion, dark eyes, and hair. She worshipped her young husband as he did her, and she was ambitious for his sake. What a sad fate was theirs. The princess then showed me 5 letters she had received from Carlotta, written in English, after the emperor's death. They gave no evidence of her insanity. The princess has never received any recompense for the land which the government took from her father, and even a pension due her, which now amounts to some 100,000s, has never been paid. She receives many promises from Diaz, but never the money. The worst things the Mexicans ever did for themselves was to shoot Maximilian. They have never had 1/4 so good government since. They had sworn good faith to the emperor and said if he sent part of the French army back, they would support him. He believed them, and when he found that they were dishonest, he applied to Napoleon for aid. When he received no answer, the empress, eager to save her noble husband, started to beg Napoleon personally for help, much against the wish of Maximilian. The Republican powers getting too strong for the emperor, some advised him to seek refuge until things grew calmer. The refuge he sought was the prison they had prepared for him. He walked into it, and he never came forth until the day he was shot. His bosom friend Lopez, whom the emperor had enriched, had made a general, and entrusted him with all his secrets, betrayed him to his enemies. On June 19, 1867, Maximilian and his brave comrades, Miramon and Mejia, were led forth to a little hill near Querétaro and shot. Maximilian's last words were, "Poor Carlotta." 3 little black crosses now mark the spot where those noble men died. End of chapter 37. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista. End of 6 Months in Mexico by Nellie Bly.